Adolf Hitler wed Eva Braun, his lifelong mistress, in the map room of his Berlin bunker in the wee hours of April 29, 1945. Municipal Councillor Walter Wagner oversaw the wedding, while Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels and Chancellor's private secretary Martin Bormann were witnesses. After the wedding, Hitler and his new bride had a little celebratory meal before Hitler woke up his secretary Traudi Junge at approximately 4 a.m. and dictated his last will. As the Red Army advanced on Berlin the next day, Berlin Defense Area Commander General Helmut Wiedling warned Hitler that the defenders were likely to run out of ammunition by the end of the night. After lunch, Hitler and Braun said farewell to the Führer bunker's other high-ranking Nazi leaders and the bunker's employees. At around 2:30, the couple went into Hitler's study and closed the door. After an hour, someone fired a shot. When Bormann and the others arrived, they saw Hitler and Braun's motionless corpses on a couch in the study. Hitler's weapon was at his feet, and his right temple was dripping blood. There were no visible signs of injury on Braun, but the almond scent, characteristic of cyanide poisoning, filled the room. The dead were taken through the bunker's emergency escape on the upper level. In the bombed-out garden outside the Reich Chancellery, the troops draped their Führer in a Nazi banner, doused them with gasoline, and set them on fire. The bodies burned through the afternoon as the Soviets sporadically shelled the area. In the early evening, the fire was put out, but not before several of the remains had been partially preserved. A shell hole was dug and used to bury the bodies. On the morning of May 2nd, a soldier in the Soviet Army named Ivan Churakov and the 79th Rifle Corps were searching the Chancellery when they came upon an oblong area of freshly churned earth. He proceeded to dig, believing he could unearth some hurriedly buried Nazi riches. Instead, his shovel hit bone. A soldier dug out 2 dogs and 2 badly burned corpses. A few days after the autopsy, Soviet forces transported Hitler's remains to a new burial on the outskirts of Berlin. This would be only one of multiple movements the body would make in the following several decades. With no face on the corpse to display to the world, neo-Nazis and others have made countless conspiracy theories about what happened to Hitler. And Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union, was a major motivating factor. It was said that Hitler had been seen in Ireland while dressed as a woman, in Egypt after converting to Islam, at an Amsterdam coffee shop, on a train leaving from New Orleans, in a Washington, D.C. restaurant, and in Charlottesville, Virginia. And, most famously, there were several claims that Hitler was living with old allies in Argentina, having, by some accounts, been whisked out of Berlin, flown to a German airfield in Denmark, and then transferred over the Atlantic by U-boat. The Führer, one FBI dossier said, had escaped to his Argentinian ranch retreat on horseback. Despite their absurdity, these claims continued to fuel a profitable industry of Hitler conspiracy theories, even after 77 years when he shot himself in Berlin, closing the worst chapter in human history. It was Soviet action soon after Nazi Germany's collapse which gave the first fodder for apparently never-ending rumors. After early reports in Western publications from Soviet personnel serving under Marshal Zhukov, who led the Russian troops during the Battle of Berlin, that Hitler's corpse had been located, Zhukov changed his position within days, claiming that the Führer's corpse had not been located and that he may have evaded capture. The Soviet commander informed a close ally of former President Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Hopkins, that Hitler was still alive less than a month after the war ended. Several Allied media started covering the Soviets' claims as they gained traction in Berlin. Newspapers in Britain stated in July 1945 that a Russian commander had said that a burnt corpse found by the Soviets was, a very lousy duplicate. The Russian garrison commander of Berlin was quoted in the American press saying that Hitler had gone into hiding someplace in Europe, with General Francisco Franco of Spain fingered for potentially sheltering him. An article claiming that British intelligence officers were searching for Hitler in Hamburg, with the Führer's appearance reportedly changed by a plastic surgery, was published in all Russian newspapers in September 1945, demonstrating the coordinated and officially backed nature of the Soviet campaign. Pravda, the Communist Party's official newspaper, published an interview with the deputy mayor of Berlin, who claimed to be convinced Hitler was alive. Because the Soviets were insisting that Hitler was still alive, the Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower made a similar claim a month later. Even though the future president quickly withdrew the comment, it has been widely cited nevertheless. Historians have slung a lot of mud at Stalin, trying to figure out what he was thinking. Some people think the Soviet leader was trying to undermine Zhukov and other prospective domestic challengers, attempting to place blame on Spain and Argentina for sheltering Hitler served to help undermine Stalin's fascist enemies overseas. As the Allies pushed into their zones of occupation in Germany, he may have wanted to sustain the perception of a continued danger from Hitler as part of a power play in territorial disputes. However, the Russian misinformation effort was met with resistance when, in September 1945, Britain sent the historian Hugh Trevor Roper to investigate the events surrounding Hitler's last days in the bunker. Historian Hugh Trevor Roper was able to compile a dossier of compelling eyewitness accounts that Hitler had committed suicide in the face of impending defeat, and that his body, along with that of Eva Braun, was incinerated in the ruins of the Chancellery Garden as Russian shells rained down. They say Trevor Roper was not up to standards and that his motivation for the effort was rooted in a desire to rid Britain of Soviet accusations that it was hiding Hitler. His integrity as an investigator in 1945 has been called into question because, in 1983, he too thought the famed Hitler diaries were real, even though they were later shown to be a forgery by a German. However, Trevor Roper knew that the reality of Hitler's death, which came when young boys and old men were losing their lives and deserters were being cruelly killed by his fanatical followers, would serve as the finest form of propaganda. Although there are the late Führer's teeth and jaw, which now sit in a Moscow archive, two of Hitler's dentists were the ones to make the first positive identification for the Russians. Forensic experts from 2018 matched his dental records to the remains. Again, the result was unmistakable. Hitler's teeth were found in Moscow, notwithstanding the claims of those who believe the corpse burnt by the bunker was a duplicate. The evidence of other eyewitnesses is also quite convincing. Hermann Karnow, the guard stationed outside the bunker on the day of Hitler's death, was the center of one of the most essential interrogations undertaken for Trevor's report. Ordered away from the Chancellery for a time by the SS, he returned to see the burning bodies of Hitler and Braun 2 meters from the emergency exit. A sketch he provided to investigators of the location where the couple were buried, which closely matches similar sketches in Soviet documents. In addition to Karnow, there is a witness who overheard Hitler's bodyguard, Otto Gunschy, direct the Führer's driver, Erich Kempka, to bring roughly 53 liters of gasoline to the bunker. Things were seen and heard by those who weren't allowed to. Britain and America's intelligence agencies had to deal with stories of Hitler riding horseback through Argentina, drinking coffee in Amsterdam, and taking the train through the American Deep South long after the Nazi leader's death. But every conspiracy theory was left worthless when the KGB agent in 2010 came out with the truth regarding Hitler's corpse. Remember when the Soviets carried the corpse from Berlin? In that year, the Soviets reburied the remains in a woodland near the town of Rathenau. It was transported again 8 months later, this time to a Soviet garrison in Magdeburg. It stayed there until March 1970, when the Soviets finally chose to pull out and hand control of the garrison to the East German Civilian Authority. If the Soviets were in charge, Hitler's grave would be kept hidden and access to his body would be restricted. But the Soviet government was concerned that the grave might become a shrine for neo-Nazis if the corpse was left in the garrison or buried someplace outside of their control. So, the director of the KGB at the time, Yuri Andropov, made the call to have the corpse incinerated. Only pieces of a jawbone and skull were preserved, and they were stored in Moscow's Federal Building. Vladimir Gumenyak, a KGB official, was chosen by Andropov to choose a secret location for Hitler's remains and to lead a team of 3 in moving the remains for disposal. Because the Soviet garrison was encircled by high-rise buildings that had been constructed by the Germans, Gumenyak's crew raised a tent on top of the location where the bones had been buried to hide from sight. After doing some digging but coming up empty, the team realized that when following the instructions to the body, they had measured 45 meters rather than 45 paces from a secret coordinate. They replaced the soil, relocated the tent, and started again. With the remains in tow, the group pretended to be fishermen and drove into the highlands, stopping at a cliff beside a little creek. There, in a spot screened by trees, they lit 2 campfires. Some of the team members were making food to avoid suspicion. Others dug up the body and started incinerating it. The remains were finally burned to ashes. They collected these in a rucksack, which Gumenyak took onto the cliff and opened up into the wind. A brown cloud of dust blew away in the wind, taking with it one of the biggest beasts in history. Gumenyak has now left the KGB for good. He is the only person still alive who was a part of the squad who disposed of Hitler's ashes and who has any idea where they were scattered. He is still worried that the tranquil woods may be used as a place of pilgrimage. Therefore, he has pledged to die with his secret. Gumenyak doesn't seem to believe that the job he performed was all that significant, even though he's been given significant sums of money and a lot of attention for what he has done. Unfortunately, history does not provide us with a crystal clear picture of what became of Adolf Hitler and his wife Eva Braun. More than 60 years have passed with no explanation. If he were to return at this point, he would be well into 116 years of age. We still don't know the full depth of Adolf Hitler's ambitions 75 years after the war ended. Many top-secret projects, some think, were stashed in subterranean tunnels across Europe as the tide of the battle turned against the Third Reich. The location and exact purpose of these projects are unknown. Ancient artifacts, like the imperial regalia of the Holy Roman Emperor, priceless artworks, and even fragments of stained glass windows from local cathedrals were hidden by the Nazis in a network of tunnels that were modeled like those found in medieval Europe. Some of the underground tunnels date back to the 14th century, when medieval laborers carved a maze of tunnels and vaults with hammers and chisels. Before we get into the secret tunnels of Adolf Hitler, here is a quick reminder that subscribing is free. Adolf Hitler was the head of the Nazi Party and the ruler of Germany from 1933 to 1945. In September 1939, his invasion of Poland sparked World War II. For 6 years, the horrific battle raged, consuming nearly the whole world. After the Second World War and the Allied powers' triumph, it was assumed that Hitler had larger intentions that were never discovered. Hitler's covert tunnels, probes into the Nazi nuclear weapons program, as well as other secret programs, like mystical practices and horrifying human experimentation. With the Allied destruction of the German rocket program's headquarters, the Führer would have learned the need of relocating secret programs to secure places. As a result, the Nazis constructed a massive network of underground tunnels that crossed Germany, Austria, Poland, France, and Czechoslovakia. The majority of these underground networks have been blocked or booby-trapped, while some remain unexplored. In 1943, Hitler and his engineers began constructing an extensive subterranean metropolis, the Projekt Riese, linked by tunnels to 7 bunker complexes where they could carry out their war preparations unhindered by Allied bombers or advancing Red Army forces. Hitler gave the go-ahead in April 1943. He assigned the project to Armaments Minister Albert Speer. In September of that year, Speer started negotiations on the project with the recently established Silesian Industrial Company to bring it to fruition. The Nazis abandoned the project 18 months later, having been crushed by the onrushing Soviets. None of the 7 shelters and tunnel systems were finished, and they are still in varying stages of disrepair today. It is believed that if the Germans had continued the war effort for another 18 months, they would have finished this underground metropolis. But war does not wait. Projekt Riese is a huge underground tunnel system located 80 kilometers south of Wrocław, beneath the Owl Mountains, Poland's oldest mountain range. To ensure that the walls lasted the test of time, the Nazis strengthened them with steel and concrete. It was projected that approximately 2 million cubic meters of granite would need to be blasted out of the Owl Mountains to finish the construction of this enormous underground settlement. Unfortunately, they were unable to complete the reinforcing project because Nazi forces abandoned it during the last days of the war. In German, Riese signifies huge. Even by Hitler's megalomaniacal standards, this was a huge project. 7 subterranean facilities linked by tunnels totaling over 5.5 miles in length beneath the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia and the sumptuous Kisiez Castle in what was then Germany and is now a region of Poland. Projekt Riese, which was built between 1943 and 1945 during World War II, is regarded as one of the world's greatest military projects today. It is still unknown why the Nazis constructed this underground facility, nor is its actual size known. Some believe the underground complex was intended to be used as a weapon manufacturing plant, while others claim it was intended to be Adolf Hitler's headquarters. According to historians, the Germans were hoping for a haven that could survive their rivals' escalating onslaught and Allied airstrikes. The Owl Mountains satisfied all standards after a careful study of several places. The mountain range was deemed the safest location because of its strong rock, which provides the underground tube with much-needed protection against airstrikes. However, it slowed the construction process significantly. Prisoners from Poland and the Soviet Union were brought in to finish the building work. The labor conditions were horrible. Many captives succumbed as a result of malnutrition, deplorable living conditions, and weariness. The vast majority were afflicted with unknown illnesses. Approximately 5,000 forced workers were killed while the construction project was underway. According to historians, around 13,000 forced laborers and convicts from adjacent concentration camps, such as Auschwitz, were put to work erecting the surface structures and excavating the mountain at Asowka. It is claimed that 5,000 people died in making the project reality, and 14 were executed following failed escape attempts. The average life expectancy for a cave worker was roughly 4 months, owing primarily to sickness, hunger, and perilous labor. Children as young as 10 are claimed to have been forced to push mining carts and perform other menial tasks. The enormity of Nazi megalomania and the cost of human lives is devastating. Even while the tunnel remains a mystery to many, it is recognized for a few things. Project Riese has almost 90,000 cubic meters of dug tunnels and can be reached by 7 distinct entrance sites or the complex bunkers found at Walim Rzeczka, Jugowice, Bodars, Sobo, now called Ramenberg, Sokolec, Osowka, and Ksi Castle. Complex Vlodars has the most tunnels drilled under it of all the tunnels. Few have a concrete finish, but the majority have been abandoned in their natural form. The goal was to turn Osowka into a metropolis capable of housing more than 20,000 Nazi troops and laborers. A visit to Owl Mountain could enlighten people about the atrocities that occurred there, as well as life in general during the Second World War. There is evidence of unfinished military buildings, stores, bunkers, building materials, and excavated stuff inside the hilly tunnel. There are a few tunnel entrances as well, many of which are inaccessible owing to the hardened brick used to build a barrier, and some of which are flooded. Some tunnels have no end in sight, leading to nowhere. Aside from these main compounds, a casual walk through the mountains will reveal numerous and somewhat terrifying traces of abandoned military barracks, bunkers, warehouses, building materials, excavated matter, and tunnel openings, many of which are barricaded, bricked, or blocked by hardened cement bags. Others are filled with water, and some appear to go on forever, leading to nowhere. To the tourists' good fortune, there are some tunnels and facilities that are open to them. Xias, with Castle Fürstenstein, which was meant to be Adolf Hitler's house, is one of the underground complex's most notable features. Only 2 underground tunnels connecting to the majestic building cellars were planned to go to the castle. So what exactly have the researchers discovered up till now about the tunnels? Excavating 7 underground locations is a difficult task. In reality, just 100,000 cubic meters of Project Riese's 213,000 cubic meters volume have been discovered thus far. Some of what was discovered has been left accessible to the public for visiting by travelers at Walim Rzeczka, Wodars, and Osowka. Archaeologists discovered an abandoned painted gate that was designed to fool passerbys, a pistol, and a massive hall with a construction track, among other things. An ancient winch, ammunition wagons, a paint inscription that reads Riese, solid arches, barracks, and other ruins in a basement were also scattered around the tunnels. Because of lack of documentation, Project Riese's objective remains unknown. In their post-war memoirs, Albert Speer and others argued that the purpose of Project Riese was to serve as a general hiding spot for the Nazi senior commanders, as well as a vast underground headquarters for Adolf Hitler. Other experts, however, believe that how this information was purposely distributed by historically untrustworthy sources is proof that this was a planned Nazi deception effort aimed to distract attention from the true objective of Project Riese. Or was it supposed to be a superhuge subterranean military facility for nuclear testing, hypersonic planes, anti-gravity devices, and other wonder weapons, such as the Nazi bell. Some people believe that the enormous subterranean facility that Project Riese planned to construct would have been an ideal location for the Nazis to carry out their never-ending and infamous military experiments to make superhumans. Well, there are many theories by historians like nuclear testing. It would be a safer place to conduct them since the Owl Mountain's almost impermeable granite would prevent any detectable emissions. Intricate tunnel systems might have been utilized to shift munitions, offices, and records in the face of an onslaught of Allied bombs. According to one theory, Project Riese was intended to establish an underground facility for the fabrication of V-1 and V-2 rockets. The V-1 and V-2 rockets were long-range weapons capable of traveling at the speed of sound. They were nicknamed revenge weapons because they were utilized by Germany to hurt Allied soldiers and destroy their morale. Others believe that conducting the Nazis' anti-gravity experiments deep beneath man-made caverns would have been far safer. According to unverified stories, the Nazis were looking for uranium resources buried deep inside the Owl Mountains. Then there was Die Glocke, also known as the Nazi bell, one of the many wonder weapons that the Germans were constructing in secret. It was planned to be 12 feet tall and 7 feet across, with counter-rotating cylinders filled with a mercury-like fluid, violet in color. According to reports, 5 of the 7 scientists who worked on this research died of unknown reasons. It has also been said that the underground complex was used to hide riches that had been stolen from banks, museums, and archives. The artwork that was plundered by German soldiers from all of the European nations that they occupied, the gold from Breslau, and the treasures of the Silesian noble family von Schaffgotsch are some of the gems that have been stolen. Since its collapse during the dying gasps of the Third Reich, the gloomy tunnels of Project Riese have spurred endless tales about the claimed treasures concealed beneath. Among these reportedly priceless items are train carriages that were said to be laden with Nazi wealth, but whose whereabouts have remained a mystery ever since World War II ended. Pieces of art that the Nazis had seized from the many countries that they invaded. The storied Amber Room from St. Petersburg in Russia was disassembled and then reassembled in its original state in a massive viewing room located beneath the Owl Mountain. 3 of the 7 tunnel systems that were planned to be built as part of Project Riese have been deemed unfit for tourism due to their unsafe conditions. In addition to Xia's castle, tours are available at 3 of the other castles, and some of these other castles even have modest gift stores on site. The curators of the Osovka tunnel system offered 2 types of tours, a standard walking tour and an extreme tour. The extreme tour involves being carried around flooded tunnels in a big metal tub while carrying a torch and praying that your iPhone doesn't fall into the icy water. And with that, the video comes to an end. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more videos like this one.